In the remote hollows of the Ozark Mountains, beneath generations of deliberate silence, rests a truth so ghastly that local authorities kept it buried for more than a century. From 1852 to 1888, over 800 pioneers vanished along a 20-mile stretch of the Butterfield Overland Trail in southern Missouri. Not from disease, not by accident, but at the hands of something far more malevolent. The Sacred Heart Chapel. A simple wooden building that promised salvation to the dying was in reality the nerve center of the most methodical mass murder plot in American frontier history. What began as sporadic disappearances evolved into a family enterprise so calculated, so pitilessly efficient, it seemed to redefine evil itself. The Whitfield family didn't merely kill for profit. They honed killing into an art. They kept meticulous records of each life taken, each family destroyed, each dream buried in shallow, unmarked earth. Before we descend into the darkness that swallowed both the Whitfields and their victims, I need a moment from you. This channel isn't for everyone. Only those willing to confront the most disturbing truths America tried to forget. If you're among the few who can face these revelations, subscribe now and drop a comment with the state you're listening from. Your support helps us exhume stories others won't dare touch. Now we travel back to 1852, when the Oregon Trail offered hope yet delivered horror. Too, like a lifeline stretched across the frontier, the trail carried dreams west through 2,000 miles of unforgiving wilderness. For thousands of families who sold everything for a new life, each mile brought equal measures of hope and peril. Disease, starvation, and disaster claimed countless souls. But in the rolling hills of the Missouri Ozarks, death wore another face. A face that smiled with Christian compassion while appraising the value of a family's worldly goods. The peak year for Oregon Trail migration, 1852, saw more than 50,000 souls braving the route west. By the time they reached the Boston Mountains, most wagon trains had already covered nearly 1,800 miles. Families were spent. Supplies dwindled. The weakest fell to trail fever, dysentery, and other ailments that turned ambition into a desperate fight for survival. It was amid this vulnerability that Father Mordecai Whitfield founded the Sacred Heart Chapel in 1851. Weathered oak perched on a ridge above a natural stopping place along the trail, where travelers rested their oxen and buried their dead. To passing pioneers, that chapel looked like Providence itself, a beacon where they might find spiritual comfort and, if needed, a proper Christian burial. Father Mordecai was a tall, gaunt man in his 40s with penetrating gray eyes and a voice that commanded attention. He arrived in the Missouri Territory, claiming to be a traveling missionary from a seminary in Kentucky. He spoke eloquently of his calling to serve westbound families, and his scripture flowed convincingly enough to win over even the skeptical. At his side stood his devoted wife, who took the name Sister Constance. Her gentle manner and apparent medical skill made her indispensable to families with sick children and dying kin. Completing the trio was brother Ezekiel, Mordecai's younger sibling, whose presence would soon become synonymous with both salvation and damnation. Where Mordecai projected the commanding aura of leadership, Ezekiel was practical, good with his hands, adept with livestock, always ready to help repair wagons or tend animals. Together they crafted an image of Christian charity that drew desperate families like moths to flame. The chapel itself was modest yet well maintained, built of local timber with a small cemetery beside it. Inside, rough, hewn pews faced a simple altar beneath a wooden cross Mordecai claimed he had carved himself. Most distinctive, though, was the unusually large basement, a space the Whitfields explained away as storage for supplies to aid destitute travelers. The surrounding country had little in it, scattered homesteads and a small trading post 15 miles east. The isolation served the Whitfields well. Fewer witnesses, less interference. Local settlers who met the family generally praised their generosity and Christian devotion. Who else would spend their lives ministering to dying strangers in the middle of nowhere? What made the Whitfields so effective was their intimate grasp of the trail's brutal realities. They knew that when families reached their ridge, many were sick, undersupplied, and hollowed out by months of hardship. The Whitfields positioned themselves as the answer. Not just spiritual shepherds, but practical helpers offering medical care, provisions, even temporary shelter for those too weak to press on. Denomination rarely mattered to the desperate. Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian. No matter the stripe, the Whitfields adapted. Mordecai knew Protestant traditions well and could quote scripture in whichever cadence best soothed his listeners. That flexibility was crucial on the frontier, where survival eclipsed sectarian lines. The first disappearance on record dates to September 23, 1852. Though investigators wouldn't piece it together for decades. The Morrison family, James, his pregnant wife Elizabeth, their 3 children, and Elizabeth's elderly father. They had traveled with a wagon train that dispersed after entering Missouri. Like others, they chose to push on alone toward their destination, confident they could cover the last miles without a group. When their wagon's axle snapped 2 miles from Sacred Heart Chapel, it felt like divine intervention. Territorial records later quote James Morrison saying the chapel appeared like a gift from the Almighty as he spotted it from the ridge where the wagon failed. Brother Ezekiel, uncannily adept at arriving precisely when needed, reached them within hours. Brother, he intoned in his slow, measured way, the Lord set you near our humble chapel for a reason. Sister Constance has birthed many babes, and your Elizabeth looks ready any day. Father Mordecai would count it an honor to shelter you while we mend your wagon and prepare for the blessed arrival. The Morrisons accepted, moving into the small cabin next to the chapel, kept conveniently for just such occasions. For 3 days, nothing seemed amiss. Sister Constance tended Elizabeth with a gentle hand. Ezekiel helped James with repairs. Mordecai comforted the anxious family. The children played in the yard. Elizabeth's father, Samuel, rocked his aching bones in the cabin chair. On day 4, the shift began. Samuel fell ill first. Severe stomach cramps. Nausea. Sister Constance called it trail sickness, a catch-all for the journey's plagues. She began administering blessed remedies she mixed from herbs and supplies kept in the basement. The Lord offers healing through nature's bounty, she'd say, stirring her concoctions. But the body must sometimes purge its toxins before relief. Within hours of her medicine, Samuel worsened. Skin turned ash. Breath labored. Violent vomiting and diarrhea. Alarmed, James suggested they seek help at the trading post to the east. But Father Mordecai urged patience. Brother James, he said, laying a steadying hand on his shoulder, I've seen this sickness many times. It must run its course. Moving him now would surely kill him. We must trust the Lord's timing and Sister Constance's gifts. By day 6, 7-year-old Tommy showed the same symptoms. Soon 5-year-old Mary as well. Sister Constance toiled tirelessly. More remedies, purifying treatments, keeping vigil over the failing. To James and Elizabeth, still unstricken but exhausted, the woman seemed a saint sent by God. The truth was far darker. Those blessed remedies contained carefully measured arsenic procured from local mining operations under the pretense of pest control. The cramps, nausea, discoloration, and organ failure mimicked trail diseases perfectly, rendering the deaths nearly undetectable to families already numbed by frontier loss. Samuel died on day 7, Tommy on day 9, Mary on day 11. Each passing drew a flourish of Christian ritual from Father Mordecai. moving words about joining the Heavenly Father and finding peace after earthly trial. The shattered survivors, grateful for spiritual comfort, never questioned the rapid succession. Entire families, after all, had fallen to disease on the trail. What they didn't see. Each night, after tears and prayers subsided, Ezekiel calmed their belongings, making detailed lists of anything of value. The Morrisons had been comfortable in Missouri. Their wagon carried fine furniture, quality tools, heirlooms, and gold sewn secretly into James's clothing. On day 12, James himself began to show the telltale signs. Elizabeth, early in labor and terrified she'd lose her husband too, begged Sister Constance to save him. The reply, later remembered as chilling by those who uncovered the scheme, was this. "My child," Sister Constance said, holding Elizabeth's trembling hands, "some illnesses are God's call home. We mustn't question His wisdom, only trust His mercy. Your husband will join your babies in paradise, and you will raise your new child knowing they await you in glory." James Morrison died on day 14, just hours before Elizabeth birthed a son who lived only long enough for Mordecai to baptize him. 3 days later, Elizabeth succumbed as well. In under 3 weeks, the Morrison family ceased to exist. To any outsider who asked, the Whitfields had a tidy account. The Morrisons, sick and spent from the trail, had caught a virulent dysentery that sometimes wiped out whole families, and died despite the best efforts of Christian caregivers who risked themselves to help. Mordecai gave them proper burials. Their possessions were consecrated to the Lord's work. A pious phrase for theft. But that was only the beginning. The Whitfields had discovered a truth that would transform their lives and terrorize the trail for 36 more years. Murder, when planned well and cloaked in religion, could be enormously profitable. Their first annihilation taught hard lessons that shaped decades of method. They learned isolated families were easier prey than groups. That gradual arsenic poisoning mirrored common ailments, and that religious authority granted near-limitless credibility to the grieving, who needed someone, anyone but God, to blame. Most of all, they saw the trail as an endless supply of victims who might not be missed for months, if ever. Unlike settled towns where disappearances sparked quick inquiry, the trail teemed with transient families whose whereabouts were unknown to kin back east. A family vanishing in Missouri might not be expected to send word for 6 months or more. And when silence stretched on, frontier dangers offered ample excuse. 2. In the months after the Morrisons, the Whitfields refined their operation with methodical care. Patterns and procedures set like clockwork. Ezekiel rode the approaches, scouting targets. He looked for wealth, for those traveling alone or in small clusters, and especially for illness or breakdowns. A pretext to offer help, Sister Constance perfected dosages and delivery, seeking maximum effect with maximum deniability. Arsenic dissolved easily in herbal teas, tinctures, even communion wine, simple to administer to entire families disguised as spiritual or medical care. Meanwhile, Mordecai polished the psychology that kept victims compliant while loved ones died. He read denominational tells and adjusted theology on the fly, to Methodists divine healing and prayer, to Presbyterians predestination and God's inscrutable plan, to Baptists personal salvation and the hope of reunion in heaven. The chapel too changed to suit murder. The basement was expanded and partitioned. One area for stowing victims' goods, one for preparing solutions, a third serving as a temporary morgue while they chose disposal. Behind the grove, they dug unmarked graves. Eventually, hundreds would lie there. The winter of 1852 to 1853 gave them time to plan. With the trail quiet, they sorted the Morrisons' effects. What to keep, sell, or hide. They made first contact with black market buyers in larger settlements like Springfield and Fayetteville. Men who asked no questions. Ezekiel excelled here. His honest face sold the lie. He was handling the property of families who had died natural deaths or decided to return east. He spread sales across communities, matching buyers to goods. Fine furniture to well-heeled settlers. Tools to working farmers. Jewelry and precious metals to specialist merchants. By spring 1853, amateurs had become professionals. Predators with a sophisticated grasp of their craft. They'd solved problems of selection, method, disposal, and profit. Most importantly, they'd built a public image that placed them above suspicion. Spring brought traffic and fresh opportunity. Their second triumph came in May. The Hoffman family, German immigrants with limited English, traveling with a wagon full of valuable possessions, fine tools, quality textiles, and a heavy purse of gold. In many ways, the Hoffmans were perfect. Language barriers made them dependent on the Whitfields. Foreign customs made them seem exotic and suspect to others. Visible wealth made them tempting. Limited English dulled the subtle warnings and muted any cry for help. Patriarch Heinrich Hoffmann, a skilled clockmaker, carried his trade to start a new life in Oregon. Wife Greta was pregnant with their fourth. 3 children ranged from 6 to 12. When wagon troubles forced them to seek aid near Sacred Heart, the Whitfields refined their craft again. This time, Sister Constance didn't wait for illness to arrive. She began small arsenic doses immediately, disguised as preventive remedies to ward off trail diseases. She persuaded them that her blessed protection would keep them healthy as they recovered. "My God," Heinrich said in broken English when offered the medicine, "you are so kind to strangers. God will bless you." "God has already blessed us," Sister Constance replied smoothly, "by letting us serve his children in need." The Hoffman murders took nearly a month, but the longer span let the Whitfields inventory fully and plan how to unload the clockmakers' tools and goods. It also allowed a close study of routines and relationships, knowledge they would leverage again. By year's end, they had murdered 3 families, 16 souls, and had begun to treat their work like any other profitable business. Records followed. Not just possessions, but methods, mistakes, successes. Decades later, investigators found those ledgers in hidden basement compartments. Horrific windows into a mechanized evil. In Mordecai's precise hand, entries recorded each murdered family. Names, dates, goods, disposal methods, profits. The tone was cold, businesslike. Human life reduced to inventory. A typical entry. Morrison family. 5 souls departed. September 1852. Possessions 2 gold coins. Furniture items. Quality tools. Bodies in Third Grove. Section C. Estimated profit $400 currency. Method arsenic via medicinal tea. Duration 17 days. Lessons reduce dose frequency to extend timeline. Lessen suspicion. 2. As word of the Whitfields' charity spread, victims began seeking them out. Families who'd heard of the kind Christians ahead, sometimes made for Sacred Heart specifically, walking right into a well-laid trap. During their second year, their method evolved again. Success depended not only on killing cleanly, but on systems managing every part of the enterprise. Mordecai, analytical and commanding, treated it like a business that happened to involve murder, not a string of random killings. Summer 1854 marked a turning point. The Weatherbys of Tennessee, Charles Weatherby, a former cavalry officer, chose Oregon over rebuilding a war-torn plantation. He traveled with wife Margaret, twin daughters Sarah and Susan aged 15, and Margaret's brother David, a skilled blacksmith with his full kit. The Weatherbys were significant, not only for wealth. Charles had converted assets to gold and jewelry hidden in a special wagon compartment, but for intelligence and suspicion. Charles was trained to notice detail and assess risk. Margaret, educated and cautious, had read widely about trail dangers. When a wheel failed near the chapel, Charles resisted the Whitfield's aid. He'd heard stories of travelers who accepted help and vanished. The isolated site and Ezekiel's conveniently timed appearance unsettled him. "I appreciate the charity," he told Mordecai, "but we can handle our own repairs. We'll be moving on." Mordecai, expert in reading men, shifted tactics. Rather than press, he withdrew gracefully, dropping mention that Sister Constance had seen signs of sickness nearby. Cholera, dysentery, and suggesting they pause until certain they were unexposed. "Of course, Brother Charles," he said gently, "a wise man guards his own. But I'd be remiss not to say Sister Constance has treated several cases of trail fever these past weeks. Symptoms can lag. Travel while infected spreads it and weakens the body. The seed of disease did its work." Margaret, exhausted and worried for her daughters, wavered. When young David developed a mild fever the next day, a sign Sister Constance claimed was early sickness, their resistance fell. "Perhaps," Margaret urged, "we should accept shelter until we're sure David isn't seriously ill." Charles agreed reluctantly, but stayed alert. His vigilance became a challenge. Unlike prior victims, Charles watched everything. Asked pointed questions about the family's past and the fate of those who sought their help. The Whitfields adapted, offering stories of successful treatments. Walking him through the cemetery to graves of travelers who arrived already dying and were given Christian burial. They even produced forged testimonial letters from grateful families who recovered and moved on. "Brother Charles," Mordecai said one evening on the porch, "I understand caution. A man who served learns it well. But think if we meant harm. Would we not have acted by now? Would we not choose easier prey than a trained soldier with weapons and watchful eyes?" The manipulation was subtle and devastatingly effective. By acknowledging Charles's suspicion and skill, Mordecai made him feel respected. By asserting he was a difficult target, he made targeting seem unlikely. By appearing open and honest, he lowered defenses. The Weatherby murders took nearly 6 weeks. Their longest timeline yet, Sister Constance began with minuscule doses in blessed water said to prevent spread. Symptoms emerged slowly, appearing natural. David, the youngest and weakest, died first, confirming Sister Constance's warnings. Gratitude for her care deepened trust. Margaret followed. Her symptoms blamed on nursing David. Charles, trained to analyze patterns, noticed disturbing threads. He and the twins remained well. The others declined. The Whitfields were always present in the worst moments. His suspicions spiked when he caught Ezekiel inspecting his wagon by night. Confronted, Ezekiel claimed he was checking for security and animals. Plausible. But Charles's instincts screamed otherwise. "Margaret," he told his dying wife, "we need to leave. Something's wrong here." But Margaret was too weak to move. Travel would kill her. He was trapped. Leave and abandon his family, or stay and risk doom. The breaking point came when Charles found a hidden basement compartment. Personal goods, clearly from other travelers. Items too intimate and valuable to be willingly left behind. A child's doll, recently loved. A pocket watch engraved with an unfamiliar name. Most damning, a letter addressed to Oregon City, dated recently, never sent. Written in a woman's hand. It thanked God for the kindness of the Christian family caring for her sick children. Charles realized he had stumbled on evidence of serial murder, and that his own family was being poisoned by their saviors. Too late. Margaret died that night. By morning, Charles felt the familiar onset. The Whitfields had been watching, sensing his suspicion, and accelerated the dosage. Mordecai slipped a massive measure into Charles's supper, ensuring the soldier would be too weak to act. As he lay dying, twin daughters at his side, he tried to warn them. But his words were dismissed as fevered rambling. The girls kept trusting the people killing them. 2. The Weatherby case taught the Whitfields much. Intelligent, wary victims demanded more sophisticated manipulation. Longer timelines, while risky, made deaths appear natural and profits richer. They needed better ways to detect and manage suspicion. Most of all, they learned that even trained, sharp minds could be deceived and destroyed if handled with patience and skill. The discovery in the basement forced upgrades to evidence disposal. They began burning personally identifying items, melting jewelry and metals to erase marks, and crafting more elaborate hiding places for goods to keep or fence. By the end of 1854, they had murdered 23 people in 7 families. Their enterprise was now a refined criminal machine, yielding substantial profit under deep cover. They no longer saw themselves as criminals, but as instruments of divine intent, prospering by God's reward for service. Then 1855 brought their first major challenge. An intended victim survived with enough knowledge to expose them. It started routinely. The Patterson family from Ohio, and ended with the Whitfields staring down discovery and making desperate choices. Thomas Patterson, a successful merchant, liquidated his business to chase Oregon's opportunities. He traveled with wife Emily, 4 children aged 8 to 16, and Emily's sister Catherine, unmarried, in her 30s, a teacher and caregiver. The Pattersons were not only wealthy, they were respectable and well-connected, the sort whose disappearance would be noticed by associates in both Ohio and Oregon. Their wagon train dispersed near the Boston Mountains. They were traveling alone when Ezekiel found them about 5 miles from Sacred Heart. Their wagon had not broken. No one seemed ill, but Ezekiel had learned to make opportunity instead of waiting for it. "Good afternoon, brother," he called as he approached. "Fine team of oxen. Quality stock. Interested in trading for fresh supplies. We keep a good store at the chapel just ahead." Thomas, shrewd by trade, weighed offers carefully. He was curious but wary. Ezekiel's manner felt a touch too friendly, too eager. "Appreciate it," Thomas said. "But we're well supplied and moving on." Ezekiel had prepared for that. Of course. But may I mention something that could spare your family trouble?" Sister Constance, our medical woman, has treated several cases of mountain fever lately. Nasty thing. Comes on slow. By the time folks realize, they're too weak to travel. The word disease did what it always did. Emily's maternal alarm sounded. "Mountain fever?" she asked. "We've heard nothing of sickness here." "Well, ma'am," Ezekiel said, brow furrowed, "folks don't like to talk about it. Bad for business. But Sister Constance has remedies that can prevent it. If taken before symptoms show. Might be worth stopping by for an exam." Thomas stayed skeptical, but Emily's instincts wouldn't quiet. The thought of a hidden danger stalking her children was unbearable. The chance of prevention too valuable to ignore. "Thomas," she urged, "let's at least speak with her. If there's disease, we should take precautions." Reluctantly, he agreed, promising himself they'd get information and move on. He had no idea he'd just stepped into a nightmare and the near ruin of his family. The Whitfields greeted the Pattersons with practiced warmth and subtle pressure. Mordecai impressed Thomas with business talk and apparent knowledge of Oregon markets. Constance charmed Emily with gentle care and love for children. Ezekiel entertained the kids with frontier stories and skillful demonstrations. Within hours, the family agreed to stay the night so Constance could examine everyone for mountain fever. Predictably, the exam found early symptoms in several, requiring immediate preventive treatment. Catherine, Emily's sister, took hers first. Devoted to the children, she urged the rest to do the same. But Catherine was the keen observer in the group, an analytical mind accustomed to noticing what others missed. On night 2, she saw Ezekiel making what looked like a careful inventory of their wagon. When she mentioned it, Constance waved it off as security. Brother Ezekiel checks all guests' possessions. We've had theft before. We make sure nothing goes missing on our watch. Plausible. Yet troubling. Catherine also noted how Mordecai's eyes lingered on Thomas's gold watch. How Constance always prepared medicines in private, never letting anyone watch. How those who took treatments most faithfully seemed to get sicker. On day 4, her suspicion peaked. She caught Constance adding a white powder to medicine for young Timothy. Asked about it, Constance called it blessed salt that enhanced healing. But Catherine, who'd grown up with a pharmacist father in Ohio, recognized that crystalline look as unlike ordinary salt. More telling, Constance grew nervous and defensive under questioning. Unlike her usual serenity, that evening, Catherine made a choice that saved lives. She pretended to drink her dose, spitting it into a handkerchief instead. She convinced Timothy to play the same game. The result was stark. While Thomas, Emily, and the 3 older children weakened under treatment, Catherine and Timothy stayed well. She also observed that the sickest were those most compliant with the regimen. By day 6, 2 Patterson children were dead. Thomas was clearly dying. Emily, though weak, was lucid enough for a whispered talk. Catherine laid out the pattern. I think they're poisoning us. I think they're killing our family. Emily's first reaction was disbelief, then anger. How could the kind Christians who nursed them be murderers? But the details aligned. The awful truth took shape. What do we do? Emily asked. Thomas is dying. The children are dying. And we're too weak to travel. Catherine had the answer ready. We have to flee. Even if it kills us. Staying will. And we must take Timothy. He's the only one not taking the medicine. Her escape plan was desperate but the only chance. In the early morning hours while the Whitfields slept, she helped Emily and Timothy slip from the cabin. Thomas couldn't move. The older children were unconscious. Catherine made the agonizing choice to leave them, rather than doom the only 2 she could still save. At the wagon, where she'd hidden gold and essentials, they heard footsteps from the chapel. Mordecai, alerted by some noise, approached. Quick, Catherine whispered under the canvas. Don't make a sound. He found her standing by the wagon. His expression told the truth. Cold, calculating, not concerned for a sleepwalker. Sister Catherine, he said quietly, you should be resting. Mountain fever clouds judgment. I couldn't sleep. She replied, voice as steady as she could make it. I'm worried for Thomas and the children. Mordecai studied her, measuring whether she'd learned too much. Perhaps, he said at last, Sister Constance should prepare a stronger remedy. Something to help you rest. Catherine heard the threat. He meant to kill her now, not later. That's kind, she said. But I'll try to sleep naturally. I must insist. Mordecai answered, hand moving beneath his coat. What followed haunted Catherine for life. As Mordecai stepped closer to force her back, Emily emerged from behind the wagon, weak from poison, but holding Thomas's pistol. Step away from my sister, she said, voice thin but firm. Mordecai turned toward the new threat. In that instant, Catherine snatched a heavy iron tool and struck him across the head. Not fatal, but enough. The women and child scrambled onto the wagon and fled, just as Ezekiel burst from the building roused by the commotion. Catherine's last sight, as they jolted away, was Ezekiel sprinting toward the cabin, likely to finish what the poison had begun. The escape became a waking nightmare, fear, exhaustion, grief. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness. Catherine drove, tended Timothy, and watched the trail behind. They had no clear path, only the desperate need to find help before pursuit or the poison claimed Emily. For 3 days, they wandered unfamiliar tracks, following old hunting paths, praying to meet travelers or a settlement. Timothy barely spoke. Traumatized, Emily called for her dead children and husband in fevered whispers. On day 4, they met a military patrol from Fort Scott, out investigating reports of Indian activity. Catherine's story sounded impossible. Murder and poisoning at a chapel. The patrol leader suspected delirium, but Catherine carried proof. A vial of Constance's medicine, samples of the white powder, and several wagon items she'd seen Ezekiel suspiciously examine. Most important, Emily herself, her symptoms matching arsenic poisoning. The investigation that followed uncovered the scope of the Whitfield's crimes and showed the survivors had escaped just in time. Soldiers found Thomas and the 3 older children dead. Clear arsenic signs. The Whitfields had vanished, carrying most of the hidden hoard. The basement revealed the system. Storage rooms packed with possessions from dozens of families, carefully sorted and cataloged. Most shocking were Mordecai's ledgers. Each family logged with cold precision. The Pattersons were victim group number 37. In under 3 years, more than 150 people had been murdered. The records tracked profits, methods, lessons learned. Catherine's survival and testimony began the end. But authorities would need years to grasp the full scope and hunt down the perpetrators. Meanwhile, the realization that such evil wore the mask of Christian charity sent shockwaves through trail communities and changed how travelers viewed strangers offering aid. The psychological toll on the 3 survivors was permanent. Emily never fully recovered. Within a year, she died, her body too damaged by arsenic. Timothy grew to adulthood scarred by childhood terror, unable to trust religious authority, haunted by nightmares of the chapel and his family's deaths. Catherine became consumed with exposing the Whitfields and bringing them to justice. Testifying to soldiers, territorial officials, and federal marshals, her detailed recollections of method and records proved crucial to understanding the enterprise. But the Whitfields did not sit idle after fleeing Sacred Heart. With years of practice covering tracks and a fortune amassed from the dead, they had prepared for discovery. Contingencies to continue operations elsewhere. The manhunt began in the fall of 1855, but the fugitives held advantages. Knowledge of remote terrain, ample resources, and most importantly, the ability to assume new identities and settle where no one knew their past. U.S. Marshal William Hargis led the case, facing challenges beyond anything he'd seen. These weren't spur-of-the-moment killers fleeing a single crime. They were organized predators who thrived by exploiting faith and vulnerability. Their religious veneer had been so convincing that many who met them refused to believe they were capable of such evil. "These aren't desperate men who killed in passion," Hargis wrote. "They are calculating predators who turned murder into business. They know how to twist faith and charity, and they can reinvent themselves at will." The breakthrough came in the spring of 1857, when Arkansas's authorities flagged suspicious activity at a remote mission near the Missouri-Arkansas line. The mission of Divine Mercy had appeared suddenly at a spot that intercepted multiple wagon routes. Travelers who stopped there began vanishing. The mission was run by Father Benedict Morrison with Sister Mary and Brother Thomas, a religious family ministering to travelers in need. Marshal Hargis recognized the pattern from Catherine's testimony and the Sacred Heart evidence. The location was strategic. The buildings larger, expanded basements, and multiple outbuildings suited to murder and theft. Reports of missing families matched the Whitfields' preferred profile. Wealthy groups traveling alone or in small numbers, seeking help, then simply gone with no trace of destination. Hargis assembled federal agents and soldiers, determined not to repeat the chapel mistake. This time no escape, no burned evidence. They surveilled the mission for weeks from the hills. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. The Morrisons were the Whitfields, and they had not only resumed killing, but refined it, using past lessons. During surveillance, the Henderson family from Missouri arrived. Prosperous farmers with 4 children, bound for a new homestead. Their wagon brimmed with equipment, household goods, and evident cash. The Whitfields' approach followed the script. Father Benedict greeted warmly, assessing wealth and weakness. Sister Mary targeted vulnerable family members with care. Brother Thomas evaluated possessions and transport. New wrinkles stood out. They had accomplices, local men posing as traders and scouts, who served as lookouts and assistants. They'd developed better disposal methods for bodies and evidence. Most chilling, they were testing faster techniques, no longer solely slow arsenic. They experimented with quicker kills to eliminate families in days, not weeks. Hargis faced a hard choice. Intervene and risk another escape, or wait and risk another family's slaughter. The choice was forced when an agent saw Ezekiel deliver milk to the youngest Henderson, who became violently ill shortly after. "We move now," Hargis ordered. "We won't let another family die while we gather proof." Q2 at dawn on June 15, 1857, nearly 2 years after Sacred Heart, the raid began. Agents and troops surrounded the compound as the family slept. No escape, no torching of evidence. What they uncovered exceeded their fears. Basements bristled with the possessions of at least 20 families. Far more than time at this site alone could account for. 4 hidden compartments held records of murders in Missouri, Arkansas, and other territories where the family had operated before establishing Sacred Heart. A criminal enterprise spanning more than a decade and multiple states took shape. Mordecai's journals revealed psychological evolution. Early entries showed twinges of guilt and self-justification. Mercy to the suffering, God's reward for charity. Later pages shed that pretense entirely. Murders reduced to profits and efficiency. Methods compared. Victim types evaluated for yield. The tone read like a thriving business. Lives as inventory, killing as procedure. Most disturbing were plans for expansion. Multiple locations run by different family members along various routes. And experiments in killing larger groups at once, motivated by the inefficiency of one family at a time. Because the Hendersons were intercepted early, they survived, and their testimony gave first-hand detail of manipulation and treatment. They seemed like angels, James Henderson told investigators. Sister Mary was so gentle, so knowledgeable. Father Benedict spoke scripture with authority. "If you'd told me they were killers, I'd have called you crazy." The Whitfields' manipulation, religious authority, apparent medical skill, genuine seeming charity, built a facade almost impossible to pierce until too late. Under questioning, Sister Constance showed no remorse, only anger that her treatments were interrupted. "Those people were dying anyway," she told Marshal Hargis. "We gave comfort in their last days and ensured their possessions supported God's work, not wasted. We provided mercy they'd not otherwise receive." Ezekiel stayed silent, obedient, unreflective. Mordecai, confronted with evidence, shed the preacher's charm, revealing a cold, calculating killer. He showed no emotion at survivor testimony or the suffering of victims. "You don't understand what we accomplished," he told investigators. "We culled the weak and diseased. We redistributed wealth from those who couldn't protect it to those who could. We gave spiritual comfort to those who would have died horribly anyway. We were instruments of natural selection and divine will." As investigators linked records to disappearances across the West, the scope ballooned. Vanished families, isolated graves, mysterious illnesses at remote religious posts, all fitting the pattern. By the end, authorities tied the Whitfields to more than 800 murders across multiple states and territories. The true number was likely higher, given transient victims never reported missing. The trial began in September 1857 and quickly became one of the frontier's most sensational proceedings. Prosecutors faced a challenge. Crimes expertly concealed, victims dead. The key was Mordecai's meticulous records. Detailed accounts of victims' methods, stolen goods, and profits in his own hand. With facts only the killers could know. Those ledgers functioned as irrefutable confessions. Catherine Patterson's testimony provided the how, the step-by-step method and psychological control. The Hendersons proved the murders continued after Sacred Heart, refined and accelerated. Physical evidence at both sites painted the full picture. Other families' possessions, poison tools and supplies, maps to unmarked graves, correspondence with fences. The defense tried to argue legitimate care for the sick, deaths from trail diseases, and goods acquired by purchase or bequest. But the prosecution showed the death patterns were statistically impossible absent foul play. Medical experts testified symptoms fit arsenic, not cholera or dysentery. And above all, the records themselves made plain that this was murder for profit, not charity. The 6-week trial drew national attention. Papers across the country covered the systematic murder of trail families by false missionaries. The case exposed migrants' vulnerability and how predators could weaponize trust and desperation. Father Mordecai Whitfield was convicted on multiple counts of murder and sentenced to hang. Sister Constance received life imprisonment, among the earliest frontier women so sentenced. Brother Ezekiel, convicted as accessory, drew 20 years in territorial prison. Their sentences ended one of the most horrific enterprises in frontier history. 2. But the fallout rippled far beyond the immediate victims. Travelers grew wary of help from strangers. Military patrols along major routes increased. Religious communities were forced to confront a hard truth. That faith and charity could be twisted by those who knew how to manipulate them. Legitimate missionaries found their work met with suspicion as people struggled to distinguish real charity from predation. The Whitfield case also laid bare weaknesses in frontier law enforcement and communication. For a decade, they'd operated undetected, partly because authorities across territories had no effective way to share intelligence on suspicious activity or missing persons. Reforms followed. Better inter-territorial communication. More systematic approaches to investigating disappearances. Catherine Patterson, whose survival and testimony proved pivotal, never fully recovered. She spent her remaining years pushing for traveler protections and helping lawmen investigate suspicious remote ministries. Her nephew Timothy, the child who survived, grew into a man marked by trauma. He never married, never had children, and worked as a frontier guide, helping families avoid the dangers that destroyed his own. The physical sites of grace and infamy were erased. Sacred Heart Chapel burned in 1858. The mission of Divine Mercy was dismantled and repurposed. But the psychological shadow lingered for generations. Families across the West told cautionary tales of false missionaries, warnings against trusting strangers who offered help on lonely trails. The case raised troubling questions about evil's nature and ordinary people's capacity for extraordinary crime. Mordecai, Constance, and Ezekiel weren't drooling madmen. They were intelligent, articulate, and convincing pillars of the community, while systematically murdering innocents for more than a decade. Their ability to sustain a benevolent facade while engineering mass death challenged assumptions about human nature and religious authority. Evil, the case showed, can be methodical, organized, and long-lived, disguised as virtue. Perhaps worst of all, the Whitfields believed themselves justified, eliminating weak and diseased travelers and redistributing wealth to worthier hands. That self-righteousness, void of remorse, revealed a moral rot more dangerous than simple greed. The Whitfield murders remind us that the frontier was shaped not only by courageous pioneers, but also by predators who exploited trust. The 800 lives taken by these false missionaries form a dark chapter in westward expansion, one that exposes the extremes of human good and human evil. Their story stands as a testament to vigilance, a warning against blind trust, and a measure of the terrible cost when evil cloaks itself in righteousness. In the end, the Whitfields remind us that the most dangerous predators are often those who know precisely how to exploit our noblest instincts for their own malice. More than a century and a half after the Whitfields met justice, their tale still haunts the American frontier's memory. The families they ruined, the trust they betrayed, and the lives they cut short remain proof that evil flourishes wherever human desperation opens a door. The courage of survivors like Catherine Patterson, who risked everything to tell the truth and seek justice, offers a counterpoint to that darkness. Her testimony not only brought killers to account, it saved lives by alerting authorities and the public to predators wielding religious authority as a mask. In remembering the Whitfield crimes, we honor not only the dead, but the living who fought back and made justice possible. Their story reminds us that even in humanity's darkest hours, some will still rise for truth and refuse to let evil go unchallenged. What do you make of this chilling chapter from America's frontier past? Does it change how you think about the romantic tales of westward expansion? The Whitfield's systematic exploitation of Christian charity exposes the blackest corners of human nature and the awful cost of misplaced trust. If this story gave you chills and made you reconsider the perils lurking along the old trails, share it with a friend who loves dark history. Tap like to support work that drags these buried horrors into the light. And subscribe so you don't miss the disturbing truths that shaped America's past. And next time you hear about brave pioneers who conquered the West, remember they also had to survive predators like the Whitfields. People who turned murder into a family business and hid their evil behind a mask of devotion.